Analysis of the origins of the Second World War, from the financial crisis to the global catastrophe. The story of the largest and bloodiest conflict in human history is rarely simple, reduced only to the aggression of one power. The world, faced with the catastrophe of World War II, was entangled not only on the battlefields, but also in a maze of diplomatic intrigues, unresolved economic contradictions, and ideological extremes. The initial perception of a simple attack by one country on another is superficial. In fact, this war was the culmination of a chain of events that began in the humiliation and financial collapse of the previous decade. The echo of the Great War and the seeds of national revanchism. The beginning of the 20th century found the future Führer still a child. In Austria in 1904, a 5-year-old boy was interested in poetry and dreamed of becoming an artist, and at the age of 15 he was in the 4th grade. 9 years later, the boy moved to Munich. A year later, the First World War began, an event that the future dictator greeted with enthusiasm. However, his joy was short-lived, as Germany's allies were defeated, which caused him deep disappointment, which became a key moment in shaping his worldview. During this period, the idea of national betrayal, which led to the defeat, took root in his mind. The catalyst that combined this personal anger with national humiliation was the Versailles Peace Treaty signed in 1919. The document imposed an enormous burden on the defeated Germany. Not only huge reparations that had to be paid for decades, but also the strictest demilitarization measures. The land army, the Reichswehr, was limited to a symbolic number of 100,000 soldiers. A total ban was imposed on heavy artillery, tank troops, and military aircraft. In addition to military humiliation, the treaty provided for the occupation of territories and contributed to an unprecedented economic collapse, resulting in hyperinflation and devaluation of the national currency. Devaluation is the depreciation of the national currency against more stable currencies, which effectively destroyed the purchasing power of the Deutsche Mark and led to the complete impoverishment of the middle class. The excessive rigidity of Versailles was, in the opinion of many analysts, a historical mistake. Instead of ensuring a sustainable peace, these draconian conditions did not allow Germany to recover, but only united the nation under the banner of revanchism. The psychological trauma inflicted by Versailles allowed Hitler to shift the blame for the country's economic difficulties from the internal crisis to external enemies. In fact, the humiliating conditions created an ideal propaganda platform for his ideas. At the same time, the limitation of the army to 100,000 people, paradoxically, did not destroy the military potential, but optimized it. The 100,000th Reichswehr became a highly professional, selected corps that retained the best officers and advanced, albeit secret, military developments, which further ensured the rapid and effective expansion of the Wehrmacht. From a coup to a legal revolution and financial labyrinths. Hitler's path to power began with inspiration from the success of others. He was inspired by the example of Benito Mussolini, the Prime Minister of Italy, who came to power after his famous March on Rome in 1922. Imitating him, Hitler launched an unsuccessful coup attempt in 1923, which went down in history as the Beer Hall Putsch. Despite the failure and the subsequent 9-month arrest, the incident provided him with unprecedented media coverage. The trial turned into a rostrum that multiplied his political rating many times. The failure of the coup marked a strategic turn. Hitler realized that the path to power lay not through storming the barracks, but through the podium and propaganda, the so-called legal revolution. During this period, in 1926, the Hitler Youth Organization was founded, and the movement's program was written, recorded in Mein Kampf. Meanwhile, Germany continued to be under severe economic oppression. In order to help her with the payment of reparations, the Dawes Plan was developed in 1924. The essence of this plan was to create a complex financial mechanism that was supposed to stabilize the German economy. Germany borrowed from banks in the United States of America to pay reparations to Britain and France. Those, in turn, used these funds to repay their war debts to American creditors. Geopolitical analysis shows that the United States of America was primarily interested in paying back its huge war loans to the Allies rather than directly helping Germany. The Dawes Plan, although it successfully mitigated the reparations crisis, made the German economy critically dependent on the influx of foreign funds. This temporary stability was bought at the price of its sovereignty in the financial sphere. The triumph of the crisis and the fall of the Weimar Republic. The fragile financial structure created by the Dawes Plan could not withstand the global upheavals. In the year 1929, the global economic crisis begins, known as the Great Depression in the United States of America. American banks, faced with an internal collapse, urgently demanded repayment of loans from Germany. Dawes's plan immediately failed completely. Thus, financial negligence on Wall Street was exported to Germany, becoming a direct catalyst for political extremism in Europe. The crisis has led to catastrophic social consequences, mass unemployment, and total instability. Under these conditions, the people of Germany, despairing, began to positively perceive even the most radical and irreconcilable views of Adolf Hitler, who promised a rapid restoration of national greatness. On the background of these processes, in 1933 he became Chancellor of the Reich. At that time, there were two leading parties in parliament that were in a fierce struggle for power: the National Socialists and the Communists. Less than a month after Hitler's appointment to the post of Reich Chancellor, a pivotal event occurred: the arson of the Reichstag building. The Communists were immediately blamed for the incident. It should be noted that historians are still arguing about who exactly is responsible for the arson of the Reichstag, and there is a reasonable version that the incident was beneficial and possibly organized by the National Socialists themselves. The accusation of Communists allowed Hitler, using emergency decrees, to immediately restrict basic civil liberties, including freedom of speech, press, assembly, and meetings, and to begin mass arrests of members of the Communist Party, his main enemies. Soon, the Communist Party, like all other political parties in the country, was completely banned. Using this incident to legalize political terror is a classic example of consolidating power in an extraordinary way. Emergency decrees became not a temporary measure, but a permanent foundation for the dictatorship, allowing the regime to arrest any opponent under the pretext of protecting the state from the communist threat. The abolition of the president and the birth of the millionth Wehrmacht. After eliminating the political opposition, Hitler focused on consolidating internal power and preparing for remilitarization. In 1934, he organized an operation known as the Night of the Long Knives. During this bloody purge, more than 1,000 people were killed, including his potential rivals within the party, the leadership of the SA assault troops, and old enemies. This action was aimed at eliminating the radical wing of the party, which could compete with the regular army, and ensured Hitler the full loyalty of the traditional military command. Without the support of the Wehrmacht, he could not begin a large-scale rearmament. In the same year, 1934, after the death of German President Paul von Hindenburg, Hitler abolished this position. He combined the powers of the head of state and the head of government, concentrating all supreme power in his hands. From now on, he should be called the Führer and the Reich Chancellor. Having gained full power, Germany openly violated the Treaty of Versailles, embarking on total military construction. The 100,000th Reichswehr was rapidly transformed into a powerful million-strong Wehrmacht. Modern tank forces were created, the fleet was restored and strengthened, and the Luftwaffe Air Force was created from scratch.
Slowly but surely, Germany began to regain its lost territories, including the Rhine demilitarized zone, and to make new territorial claims. The lack of a harsh reaction from Britain and France to the apparent violation of Versailles led Hitler to a strategic conclusion: the West is not ready to fight. Each unpunished return of territory served as a test of international resolve for him. The failure of this test convinced him of the correctness of the offensive strategy. The geopolitical maze and the alignment of the figures. The events leading up to the war were dictated by complex multilateral interests. After the First World War, Great Britain and the United States of America feared not only Germany, but also the potential strengthening of France. This unspoken concern contributed to the provision of credit support to Germany to preserve the European balance of power. In parallel, a rapprochement between ideological opponents developed. Germany and the USSR signed the Rapallo Treaty in 1922, which, despite deep ideological differences, allowed Germany to test military equipment and train personnel at Soviet training grounds, and the USSR to receive military secrets and technologies. Fearing such a strange rapprochement, France and Great Britain signed the Locarno Treaties in 1925, which guaranteed the western borders of Germany, but deliberately left its eastern direction uncertain. This was perceived in Berlin as a tacit permission to expand to the east. Hitler, for his part, skillfully played the communist threat card in front of the Western powers, presenting himself as the only defender of Europe from the Soviet Union. This allowed him to launch a large-scale militarization, to which no one from Western countries said a word. In 1936, Germany, Japan, and Italy signed the Anti-Comintern Pact, formally directed against the activities of the Communist International, thereby cementing the axis of future aggressors. The culmination of the policy of appeasement were the Munich Agreements in 1938. Germany, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom signed this document, which, in fact, was a cynical conspiracy to divide Czechoslovakia, carried out without the participation of the Czechoslovak side itself. By sacrificing Czechoslovakia, the West made a strategic mistake, depriving itself of a strong ally in Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, Great Britain was secretly negotiating with Germany on the fraternal division of spheres of influence. However, Hitler, seeing that London was not ready for war, did not take these proposals seriously. The USSR, having learned about the secret negotiations and seeking to put pressure on everyone, invited Great Britain and France to the Moscow talks in order to agree on mutual assistance. After two refusals from the West, the USSR and Germany concluded a mutual non-aggression pact, Molotov-Ribbentrop, in August 1939, which included secret protocols on the division of territories in Eastern Europe. The conclusion of this pact between ideological enemies shows that at a critical moment, geopolitical interests, gaining time and dividing spheres of influence, completely overshadowed the ideological struggle. The USSR, realizing the unreliability of its Western partners, sought to redirect the blow of Nazi Germany to the West in order to move the war away from its borders as much as possible. In such a political mess, the Second World War began.
From Blitzkrieg to the Strange War and the Miracle of Dunkirk. The war began on September 1, 1939. Under the pretext of a staged Polish attack on a German radio station, German troops crossed the border. Hitler presented this as a police action to protect the Germans from Polish aggression. Great Britain, which promised to defend Poland on March 31, 1939, together with France and the countries of the Commonwealth, declared war on Germany. Hitler's army was rapidly advancing eastward and reached Warsaw in 8 days. At the same time, Soviet troops entered Poland, fulfilling the terms of the secret pact. Soon, Germany and the USSR signed a treaty of friendship and border, finally dividing the Polish territories. After the declaration of war, there was a period of absolute calm on the Western Front. The Allied divisions stood idle, which went down in history as the Strange War. This inaction was based on the false hope that Hitler would not take any chances. This delay proved fatal for France, as it allowed Germany not only to conduct the Polish campaign, but also to capture Denmark and Norway, as well as prepare for the invasion of France. On May 10, 1940, German troops invaded Western Europe using blitzkrieg tactics. The Benelux countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, quickly capitulated. After reaching the shores of the Pays de Calais, the Germans created an encirclement ring around the Allied forces. The Allied forces had to carry out an emergency evacuation through the port of Dunkirk. This operation, called Dynamo, became a symbol of saving the army in the face of defeat. Huge forces were used to carry it out. According to the data, 693 British vessels, including 39 destroyers, took part in Operation Dynamo. In addition, 168 ships of other allies, mostly French, provided assistance. The use of hundreds of civilian, small vessels turned the military defeat, loss of equipment, into a propaganda symbol of national unity and survival for Britain. The rescue of most of the personnel, albeit without weapons, provided Britain with the opportunity to continue the war, which was crucial for the further course of the conflict. The failed world and the globalization of conflict. After the encirclement and evacuation of the Allies in France, it was the turn of surrender. The country agreed to the occupation of most of its territory, leaving the smaller one under the control of the puppet pro-Nazi Vichy government. The new situation led to an unprecedented incident. Fearing that the French fleet would fall into German hands, Britain did not hesitate to attack and sink it in the port of Mers-el-Kabir. It was a strategic move aimed at protecting British naval supremacy, carried out against former allies. Meanwhile, in London, Charles de Gaulle led the French resistance, refusing to recognize the surrender.
At that time, the Soviet Union, using the geopolitical confusion, annexed the Baltic states and achieved the transfer of part of the territory of Romania, and also ended the Winter War with Finland, because of which it was excluded from the League of Nations. After the surrender of France, Germany offered Britain peace, but after being refused, Hitler launched an air war, the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe sent bombers to English cities in the hope of an early surrender. However, Germany lost this battle, having failed to break the will of the British and faced effective resistance from the Royal Air Force. Hitler's inability to defeat Britain in an air battle was a strategic mistake that forced him to fight on two fronts. Meanwhile, the conflict was becoming global. Italy attacks British Egypt. Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Berlin Tripartite Pact. Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia will soon join the top three players. In February 1941, Hitler sends reinforcements to North Africa. Later, in 1941, Bulgaria joined the Axis, and Yugoslavia, which had renounced the Union, was occupied and divided by the Germans and Italians, who then rushed to Greece. On the 22nd of June 1941, the time of the largest battle is approaching. According to the Barbarossa Plan, three powerful army groups, North, Center, and South, attacked the entire western border of the USSR. Finland entered the war on the side of the Axis, seeking to regain its territories. The Germans were moving rapidly eastward. They captured the Baltic states. By September, they had besieged Leningrad and captured Kiev, and by October they had reached Moscow, and by November, Rostov-on-Don. However, the Red Army's counteroffensive near Moscow threw back Army Group Center, thwarting the plan for a lightning victory. At the same time, in the Atlantic, the Germans began sinking American ships carrying weapons and food for Great Britain. In the Pacific Ocean, while the Europeans were busy, Japan captured half of China and bombed the American naval base, Pearl Harbor, on December 7, 1941, which forced the United States of America to declare war on Japan. Thailand, in turn, joined Japan.
The attack on Pearl Harbor and the invasion of the USSR finally connected the European and Asia-Pacific theaters of operations, making the conflict truly global. The peak of the offensive, the oil famine, and the crimes of humanity. By the middle of 1942, Japan controlled vast territories in Southeast Asia and the northwestern Pacific Ocean. The Allied forces suffered a crushing defeat, and Japan almost reached Australia before it was stopped by American troops. In the summer of 1942, Hitler changed his strategy, shifting the main thrust of the Wehrmacht to the south, to the Caucasus, where vital oil fields were located. The analysis shows that the Third Reich was critically short of fuel to wage a protracted war, and energy resources became a priority. The Germans captured Crimea and Kuban. In the middle of July 1942, the Battle of Stalingrad began, which became a key point of confrontation for control of the Volga.
In parallel with the offensive of Nazi Germany on all fronts, concentration and death camps were systematically established in the occupied territories. These institutions were created for the imprisonment and subsequent extermination of people of different nationalities, political opponents, and representatives of those groups of the population who, according to Nazi ideology, were subject to complete extermination. This horror became a tragic page of the genocide, emphasizing that the regime was waging a war not only for territory, but also for the realization of its inhuman ideology. In the Pacific, Japan's offensive was halted by American forces after key naval battles at Midway Atoll and Guadalcanal. Japan, having suffered crushing defeats, switched to strategic defense. A fundamental change and a change of poles. The turning point in the war came first in North Africa. After the Italian troops failed to cope with British Egypt, Germany sent reinforcements there. However, the Allied forces successfully advanced, and on the 13th of May, 1943, the troops of the fascist bloc in North Africa surrendered, which marked the end of the North African campaign. After that, the Germans, fearing the Allied landings, occupied the southern part of France, ruled by the Vichy regime. The key event on the Eastern Front was the Red Army's counteroffensive at Stalingrad. As a result of the operation, it was possible to encircle and defeat a group that included 2 German, 2 Romanian, and 1 Italian armies. The Battle of Stalingrad was, admittedly, the bloodiest battle of the Second World War. This heroic defense gave the Soviet Union the necessary time to evacuate and set up military enterprises in the eastern regions. The success of the counteroffensive demonstrated that the USSR was capable not only of defending itself, but also of completely destroying large enemy forces, which provided it with a strategic advantage until the very end of the war. In the summer of 1943, German troops launched their last major offensive attempt near Kursk. The Soviet army repelled a powerful attack within a week and then launched its own counteroffensive, crushing the offensive potential of the Wehrmacht. In the southern direction, Allied forces captured Sicily and southern Italy, and Mussolini was taken into custody. However, German troops quickly captured the northern part of the country, freed Mussolini, and put him at the head of a puppet government. In August 1943, the battle for the Dnieper begins, during which the Red Army liberated the Crimea and left bank Ukraine, including Kiev. By the end of 1943, the outcome of the war had become obvious. A meeting of the Big Three, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, took place in Tehran, where issues of opening a second front and the post-war world order were discussed. An inescapable ending and a new world order. In 1944, German troops began to retreat along the entire front line. The large-scale Belarusian offensive Operation Bagration begins in the summer. This operation was characterized by exceptional rapidity. Soviet troops advanced at a distance of 20 to 30 kilometers per day. The amazing speed of the offensive indicates that by this point, the Red Army had achieved absolute superiority in logistics and breakthrough power. On the 6th of June, 1944, the Second Front in Europe finally opens. The Allies landed in Normandy.
6,939 ships and vessels were allocated for this monumental amphibious operation. It should be noted that the success of the landing was ensured not only by force, but also by a complex disinformation operation, during which the Germans were informed that the troops would land in Pas-de-Calais, while the Allies were landing in Normandy. The Germans were taken by surprise. Paris was liberated on August 25th. In December, the Germans tried to attack in the Ardennes for the last time, but were stopped and pushed back over the Rhine. On January 12, 1945, the Vistula-Oder strategic offensive operation began, which, according to many military historians, became the fastest offensive of the Second World War. This offensive, launched at the request of Great Britain to ease the Allied situation in the Ardennes, led to a rapid advance of Soviet troops. Looking at the approaching collapse, Finland, followed by Romania and Bulgaria, withdrew from the war. The Germans withdrew troops from Greece and Yugoslavia. Germany's last European ally, Hungary, was also forced to capitulate. The Red Army occupied East Prussia. It is noteworthy that on March 27, 1945, even Argentina declared war on Germany and Japan. At the end of April 1945, the Red Army launched an offensive against Berlin. Realizing his complete defeat, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. On the night of the 8th to the 9th of May, Germany signed the Act of Surrender. Later, it was divided into 4 occupied zones. The epilogue. The Second World War was the largest and by far the bloodiest catastrophe in human history. It claimed over 70 million lives, an unimaginable price paid for the mistakes of diplomats and the ambitions of dictators. It was the only military conflict in which nuclear weapons were used, which forever changed the concept of war and peace. Following the Second World War, the former European powers lost their global influence. 2 superpowers, possessing not only powerful armies, but also polar ideologies, have taken leading roles in world politics: the United States of America and the Soviet Union. This change in global leadership marked the beginning of a new era, the Cold War, in which the world teetered on the brink of nuclear conflict. Studying this era is not just about listing dates, but constantly reflecting on the lessons of the past in order to better understand the present. If this story made you think about the depth of historical processes, please share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next history dive.